Now, there's a difference between Islamic law and Muslim law. And Muslim law is not Islamic law, and Islamic law is not Muslim law. And that will require a separate occasion to get into that. But there's a further difference between hornbooks of Islamic law. They exactly like hornbooks in the common law system, which we tell our students do not read. If you want to be a good lawyer, do not read hornbooks because they're too black and white. What are hornbooks useful for? They're useful for people who want a quick answer to a clear-cut question. But the hornbooks are supposed to they are the de facto legal disposition if there are otherwise no variant circumstances, presumptions, or evidence. So the hornbooks gives you the fiat. Beyond the hornbooks, each adjudication is different, whether in the field of responsa or in the field of ahkam amaliya or applied law. So a lot of students of Islamic law, they first have to learn how to read a legal hornbook. Then learn how to read the equivalent of case law, and to understand that the authority of case law within a locality, within an inn of court means the jurisdiction of a court, has authoritative priority over the hornbook. So a lot of anthropologists will, for instance, go to a court in a specific area, and they'll say, wait a minute, but the practice in this court is so different from the hornbooks of Maliki law. And that's because the jurisdiction of the court, the case law of the court, trumps the authority of the hornbooks. And of course, modern Muslims, especially those of the Puritan variety, who read hornbooks as spelling what the law is, end up with very odd results. And they end up with, it's exactly like someone trying to understand American law and going and getting Gilbert's still around? Or Nutshells, the Nutshells hornbook series. You read it, you get a very mimicked view of the law, and you miss all types of complexities. And if you have a good teacher, you also get a bad grade. But that's a lot of bad teachers of Islamic law, unfortunately, these days.
So Muslim countries do legislate? Do they have civic laws?
Muslim countries, most Muslim countries do not apply Islamic law. I mean, that has to be very clear, because it's often something. And in the 1980s, some Muslim countries had flirted with the idea of Islamic law, but then found it difficult at a variety of levels because they are post-colonial legal systems. Their legal systems are based on the legal systems of the colonizer, whether the colonizer was Dutch, French, whatnot. Or in Malaysia or Indonesia, for instance, the Australian legal system has a huge impact, far more than anything else. Now, having said that, even countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia has solved the need for legislation by executive provincial decisions, which covers a whole gamut of issues. The problem is that as executive decisions, they're royal edicts, and royal edicts are not a product of any democratic system, or even the appearance of a democratic system. In Iran, legislation it's been a constant struggle between the need for legislation and the traditional fundamentalist clergy that fear change and fear, like the Islamophobes here who fear the turn to Islam, these phobes fear the invasion of the West. So they do everything possible to avoid the semblance of the entry of any Western ethos. And, the consequences are what they are. Yeah.
Yes.
I apologize if at the beginning of my question is request my internet, so I what it is. Would you please tell us if your particular conception of Sharia is it shared by the dominant scholars scholars of Sharia, or whether it is some departure from dominant?
If I am so brilliant as to invent my own tradition of Sharia and madhab, I would have loved to believe so, but unfortunately, I'm not so brilliant. Usually people who ask this question, either, and I'm not saying that you are, but either the puritanical orientation or the Islamophobic orientation, they go something like this. Well, yes, this guy has very interesting ideas, etc., but he just represents himself. He doesn't represent anyone else. Well, I'm not a very good bragger, so someone should do it for me. But I'll do this little bit of bragging. Recently, I spent the whole summer as a guest of the Sheikh of Al-Azhar and the Mufti of Egypt, an honored, extra spoiled guest. Now, I don't think they invited me because of my heretical, radical, or that they are secretly want to adopt the madhab of Khaled Abou El Fadl and desert their own. The fact of the matter is, outside the very myopic view of pro-Islam, anti-Islam that we find in these Islamophobic and counter discourses, the Muslim world is a very complex layer of dynamics. And so I was also an honored guest in Malaysia, Indonesia, invited by a class of the clergy, given an award. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people who hate my guts and who think that I'm the worst thing that ever happened to Sharia. Of course, that's the nature of things. But that usually means you're on the right track. If everyone likes you, that's the problem. Everyone hates you. Actually, that wouldn't be a problem for me, but, so I don't think that... My views are definitely at odds with the puritanical view of Islam, of Islamic law. But the puritanical view of Islamic law is a thoroughly modernistic phenomena. It's a post-colonial phenomena that has nothing to do with the Islamic classical tradition. It doesn't mean that it can't find support in the classical tradition. Of course it can. It doesn't mean that it cannot root itself in the classical tradition. Of course it can. But it doesn't represent the epistemology or the methodology or the hermeneutics of the classical tradition. The Sheikh of Azhar or the Mufti of Egypt or the Mufti of Malaysia or these individuals represent more of the classical interpretive hermeneutic tradition than a puritanical scholar who studied Islamic law for a couple of years through some correspondence course and then decided he's God's gift to the world. Which is, by the way, that for a regular classical jurist, average training time 14 years. For a regular puritanical jurist, average training period 2 to 3 years. You derive from that whatever you want.
Yes. I'm interested in marriage contracting, and I actually spoke to you about a project that I'm putting together in the spring this book, because I'm interested in Muslims in America writing marriage contracts and what that marriage contract means between the spouses. And I have a terminology question that comes out of the comment that you made a couple of minutes ago where you were talking about the difference between Muslim law and Islamic law. And so I tend to describe this as Muslim marriage contracting. And I'm interested in how it relates more broadly to questions of diaspora and deterritorialized identities and so forth. But I'm wondering, first of all, if that's the correct way to refer to it, and secondly, if I should use a different terminology if I were thinking about studying marriage contracting among Muslims in a Muslim-majority country where Islam does govern family law matters.
Well, okay, you're interested in marriage contracting in Muslim countries or in non-Muslim countries?
In non-Muslim countries.
In non-Muslim countries.
Yeah, I'm wondering about whether or not there would be a terminology.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think it would be a terminology. I think your choice of Muslim marriage contracting is exactly right. Because what counts as Islamic law must go through the test of time. What becomes accepted in the so-called, the sort of authoritative texts of Islamic law is never an immediate thing. That's a modern phenomenon. I mean, it's after the jurist is long dead and buried. If there is emergent consensus as to the authoritativeness of the views of that jurist, that becomes part of the Islamic law corpus. And this is something that, according to Alan Watson, a specialist in Roman law, that Islamic law shared with the Roman legal tradition. Now, I don't know if Alan Watson, he says that this is pre-Justinian Roman law, but anyway. This is quite, so Muslim law is the correct way. Correct way of describing it. I don't think it makes a difference whether you're in a Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, but in Muslim country, a lot of course, great deal of variety from one Muslim country to another. Some Muslim countries, what has emerged is the use of forms, and unless you click the right box, for instance, the marriage is assumed to be without conditions, unless you click the right box and vary it. That's a very interesting development in itself. Talking about evolving Islamic law, the use of these forms, even who negotiates the marriage contract has varied from one society to another, from one period to another immensely, and the degree of if any, of involvement of the actual parties to the marriage contract, because you have one paradigm where the families, basically both families, negotiate the contract, and then the more modern phenomena of the contract already being negotiated by the spouse and groom and sort of presenting their family with a done deal. Okay, this is what, and this is now in the United States, obviously, the more modern model is what tends to prevail. Unless you are in some really close section of primarily Muslim neighborhood in London, where people can continue speaking Urdu and rarely use English, most Muslims who have had to acclimate and assimilate found that the level of individual agency in marriage contracts have risen considerably. But what I find quite fascinating is in the sort of the way that Islamic law is negotiated into marital contracts. The more young the couple are, the more hip and happening the couple are, they tend to negotiate things that are not legally enforceable. So for instance, they'll say, okay, this is now, remember, they want in Shariah compliant contract, right? So put condition that we love each other forever and we become soulmates. Okay, sure. Put it in. And then when you ask Ashley about divorce or settlement, they say, no, don't jinx us. It's a bad omen to talk about this stuff. So, really